It is just now 4 o'clock my time. I'm in Central Time over here in Texas, and I'm really glad that you're here. We're just going to take a minute or so to allow people to kind of spill into the class in case they're coming from the other performance that was just going on. And in that time, I just wanted to let you know that Sarah is here with us. She's going to be a co-panelist, co-host for me today. And she is the one who has helped me with everything WoodwindFest and setting up this event today. So I just wanted to take a second to introduce Sarah, and also if you guys could thank Sarah in the chat for helping me to get onto the platform today, that would be awesome. So thank you, Sarah. And just as a brief introduction, I am a clarinet professor at Texas A&M Commerce, which is a university right outside of Dallas. And I've been here for 18 years. This is my 19th year in Texas. And I am super passionate about anything nerdy clarinet related. Before I moved to Texas, I was in the Army Band in Washington, D.C. And I have a lot of friends still in the DC area. But yeah, I have made Texas my home since then. So I'm sure you're enjoying the Texas accent. It's gotten pretty deep over the years. But that's who I am and where I've been. So today I just wanted to take a minute and talk with everyone about some simple steps to becoming a better clarinetist. And this is really designed to work for students who are studying the instrument and also for teachers. So I have a lot of pedagogical resources in the presentation today. And actually, if you look into the chat history and go all the way to the top, I shared a link with you guys to a document that has all of the resources that I reference in today's talk. So you can save that to the files on your device, or you can just open that and look at that as we go through the lecture. So that's the first part, is just kind of introducing you to those materials, making sure that everybody knows that Sarah is there. And if you have any questions or comments along the way, feel free to stick those in the chat box. So before we get on to the topic of the 5 simple steps that I hope to share with you today, I do want to take just a quick moment and share with you about my concepts for gathering information and inspiration as a clarinetist. So I'm going to be doing some screen sharing with you guys today. Hopefully you can see this all right. In my experience, one of the most important things for a teacher to establish in their young music students is a good oral image for their instrument. And as a seasoned professional now, I still look back to my very first lessons and I recognize the impact of this oral image. So my very first lesson was with Diana Haskell, who just finished a concert right before this for WoodwindFest. I hope you guys were able to catch that. But I don't remember a lot of that lesson. I don't remember her exact words. I remember being terrified. But even though I don't remember the exact details of that lesson, I do remember that she sent me home that day with a recording of Palavetzian dances and Scheherazade. And the reason I remember that is because when I got home, I stuck my record, yes, it was a big record, on my record player, and I fell in love with Russian music, and I fell in love with clarinet. And not any less significant than that passion that I developed through that, while I was listening, I was gathering a ton of information about expectations for tone, technique, musical expression, all of these important things that I would have had zero awareness of in my beginning band blended classroom. So then in my second lesson, I went back to Diana the following week. She asked me what I thought of that recording. And of course, like any typical teenager, I went on and on and on with my enthusiasm, and I probably rattled for way too long, but she was patient and listened to me and my excitement for music and for the things that I had heard. And then she took time to show me the actual orchestral excerpts for those pieces, which is really significant because I had never seen music like that before. I was a little bit flabbergasted by how much black ink there was on the page and how high the notes went and how fast they were. Of course, I could remember what they sounded like. But I just remember being blown away by the high D. And I remember that clearly, even though this is many years ago. And she took the time to explain to me that high Ds are really not difficult at all. It's just a low B flat, and you push your register key and you get an F, and you lift your first finger and add your pinky, and out pops the D. And so we practiced register slurs that day, and I was able to produce a high D, and I was super impressed with myself, as most teenagers would be on a day like that. So then she asked me about what I thought about the clarinetist in the recording, and I just remember going on and on about, I didn't know you could move your fingers that fast. And she took the time to show me some patient practice drills for learning those notes and how to put those into pieces and build practice patterns like circle drills and add-on method. And she showed me that on the actual excerpt and sent me home with a copy of that excerpt from my lesson that day. And over the course of many months of practicing and listening to that music again and again, I eventually learned to play that Polovetzian dances, even as a young student. So the impact of these two lessons, only a week apart in my very first lessons of clarinet, which was about four months into my beginning band year, really cannot be exaggerated in the importance that they had on me as a musician, and being inspired, and in my awareness and understanding about what a clarinetist is and what we do. So in this new modern world of technology that we have right now in 2020, I feel like it's super, super important for us, our teachers, our educators, our inspiration, to be in the front of those models for our students. There's just too many recordings out there that maybe we don't need our students listening to, and there are definitely just hundreds and hundreds of recordings of amazing artists. So I feel like if you can create a recommended listening list that includes a diverse roster of performers as well as a diverse list of performing ensembles from solo to chamber to band and orchestra, as well as showing diversity in the styles of music. So putting some music from different countries and traditions. I think that you can really become a voice of inspiration for your students very quickly and help to kind of inspire them to listen more and to approach music with more sincerity and understanding. So now I'd like to go on to the topic of these actual simple steps to stronger clarinet playing. And I want to focus my energy today mostly on clarinet specific details or problems that sometimes get a little bit neglected, or they're a little more challenging to teach in a regular classroom. And I hope to be able to provide you some tools for your pedagogy toolbox, both for your own practice room, but for your students as well. So some of the things I'll share with you today hopefully are new to you. The first thing that I want to discuss is fluency in musical language. So just as with learning any new language, students in music can often struggle with the interpretation of symbols to make sound. But in music, there are added complications. These symbols will represent not only sound, but also pitch, duration, volume, style, tempo, all kinds of new things. So I have created a couple of short little blog musings on my Mad Clarinet website. Those are listed on your references. Again, you can find that list of references in a shared file in your chat. And these little blog posts really just deal with the complexity of learning a musical language, both in terms of pitch and in rhythm. And feel free to read those, print those, share those. Those are free resources on my website. Again, that's madclarinet.com. So I hope that those will help you in your own interpretation of what it is that you're doing, and also especially teaching young students. So one of those deals with the music, the 1, 2, 3s, the rhythm of music, and one is the ABCs, or the notes and pitches of music. So clarinetists have a particularly difficult challenge when it comes to music. Our musical language is complicated in that our instrument does not reproduce pitches at an octave with the same fingering. Whereas if you're a flutist, for example, and you grow to recognize that your low G that you learn in beginning band class, which is thumb 1, 2, 3, also becomes your high G, thumb 1, 2, 3. And even your higher G is a related fingering, slightly altered, but related. It reinforces this is a G and this is also a G and this also is a G. But on the clarinet, we have a big problem. Our low G on the clarinet is going to have a thumb and 6 fingers. Our next G on the clarinet is going to have no fingers. And then our third G, when we finally get to it, is that flute fingering, thumb, register 1, 2, 3. And we actually will get to the point where we're playing a fourth G up there, super high, and that fourth G can have almost 24 fingerings with all of its alterations and trills. So most clarinetists are a little bit challenged in recognizing that a G feels like this, because it doesn't feel like that everywhere. So this is true for all the notes of the clarinet. I just picked G because it's really creative, and if I look through my fingering chart that I keep in my office, I counted them up the other day. I have 23 fingerings for G's in my office at the moment. So I don't know that any other instrument can do that. And most of those are alternate fingerings or trill fingerings, but especially in the altissimo, we definitely have a lot of options. So in my experience, young clarinetists can often get so baffled by this unique demand that they just give up note naming completely. So by the time they're learning their altissimo register, they're learning by going up and going down and adding fingers and taking away fingers, but they may not have the ability to name the notes, or if you name a note, recognize the fingering that's attached. So I wanted to share with you something that my students sometimes are surprised to learn when they get to college, and that is that your musical language on the staff repeats itself below and above the staff. So remember way back in beginning band when you learned that the spaces of the treble clef spell face. I think in our clarinet teaching it would be a good idea to reinforce that those are the names of the ledger lines below the staff and from the top of the staff going upward. So your spaces become your lines. And conversely, your lines become your spaces. So the lines of the treble clef, every good boy does fine, right? With that F shared. Now, if you look at the spaces below the clarinet, it makes a whole lot of sense. Your young band students do a really good job of learning in middle school that a low E is a low E and a low G is a low G. But for some reason, in the development of those players, a lot of times the upper part of this staff in the ledger lines above gets a little bit tangled and lost. So it's definitely something that if you reinforce with your students can help them. So note naming on the staff as they learn their higher register would be a really great idea for them. Another trick that you can do with students to make sure that they're understanding this particular concept is have your students play a note name in their octaves to see if they are able to do that. So your first year clarinet students by the end of the year should definitely have at least 2 F fingerings that they can recall. And in their second year of study, they should be able to recognize 3 F fingerings. Whereas your more advanced students that are in your high school programs and learning their Rose etudes for Allstate, they should know 4 F fingerings by name and by recognition on the staff. Sometimes this is a more difficult skill than you would think. And I notice with my own students that a lot of times if I ask them to play E flat in octaves, they get a little befuddled because it's not something that we typically ask for. And I don't know if you've noticed, but it's not typically found in our music. There's really not a lot of examples in our repertoire where octaves happen. That's because it is complicated on the clarinet to do octave leaps. A lot of fingers are going to move. And in fact, in Texas this year, we have 2 Allstate etudes that do involve octave leaps, and the students are stressing over that because it is a very complicated skill. So I think this is a really important thing for us to think about and consider in our own teaching and learning. In regard to the notation of time, through meter and rhythm. Students also can grow so accustomed to simple time and simple structures in their beginning band classrooms that we sometimes don't give them the flexibility that they need to interpret meters and rhythms that are not as familiar. So one of the things that I like to do for that, for their musical fluency, is just help them with creating tunes they already know in new meters. So sometimes I'll do this for students, and sometimes I'll actually ask students to do this for me. And this is not a very complicated skill, but at first the students are really trepidatious. They just have a sense of doubt about themselves. But once they learn the structure of rhythm and how to break things into pieces, this process is really not too difficult for them. It's just not something that we practice very often. So holding students to this consistent routine for deciphering rhythm and performing rhythm exercises is very, very useful in my teaching and in my own learning. It helps with independence, basically, but also it helps in sight reading skills. So if you have students that are struggling with sight reading, usually it's because they're having trouble with their musical fluency, and rhythm is one of the big reasons for that. Another thing that I like to do with students to help with rhythmic fluency is the Stevenard scales. The Stevenard Practical Study of the Scales is a book that presents your scales, 12 majors and 12 minors, all of them in 12 lines of exercise. So 144 different lines, different meters, different rhythms, different articulation, different dynamic, different style. All of them are one line long. So students don't feel completely overwhelmed by these because after all, they are kind of short. And once you learn the pattern, it's the same over and over. But if you look at the left side of this page, you can see we have simple time in a complex rhythm. We have compound time in a simple rhythm. We have simple time, simple rhythm with articulation patterns. Compound time, simple time, or complicated rhythm. So this is a really, really great book. And if you haven't used this book, I would encourage you, especially if you're an advanced player and you're looking to take your sight reading skills to the next level and clean up your internal subdivision of time. Sometimes I feel like we as teachers really limit what our students are able to do because we kind of underestimate them. We think that a topic's going to be extremely difficult and we don't have time to discuss that, and the student is going to feel threatened by that information. But most of the time in my teaching, what I found is that once you get past that little hurdle of resistance with a student, particularly with rhythm, this creates a lot of confidence and determination. So this is a really good source for students. So now I would like to move on to a really, really important topic that's specific to the clarinet, and that is the compression of the airstream. This is a topic that is taught very well by clarinet players, I must say. But for those who are not clarinetists, who are teaching clarinet, particularly band directors, sometimes this gets taught a little bit wrong, in my opinion. And so I think this is really, really important that we spend a little bit of time here. So as wind instrumentalists, we can go on for a really long time about air in general, but because we have limited time today, I just want to make a few comments about this clarinet specific basic for air and hopefully give you a new idea or two to use in your own performance, but also in your teaching. So the process for breathing and maintaining good breath support while playing is similar for all wind instruments. So I'd like to just skip right past that and let's move to tongue height. So great air pressure from your diaphragmatic control needs to be sped up or compressed. We call that condensation of the airstream when you're playing the clarinet. And we do this by the position of the tongue inside the mouth, or we call this voicing. So other wind instrumentalists generally play with a very open oral cavity. And I remember living with flute players in college, and they would practice and panting like a dog and steaming up their mirror, trying to get their mouth open and their tongue low. But we don't need a resonance chamber like a flutist does in the mouth. What we need is a strong, fast airstream that can vibrate a reed. So clarinet teachers use a lot of tools to teach fast air and to teach compressed air. But I want to share with you one that I've created. I call this the tongue climb. And I use this exercise specifically to help students identify with where their tongue is in their mouth, because a lot of times students just aren't real aware of what's going on when they play the clarinet. So if you've got clarinets with you today, go ahead and grab those. We are going to get to playing in just a minute. Make sure that you've got your mute on, because we don't want fighting microphones in here while we're all trying to play. But before we get to that, I just want to introduce the tongue climb. So with a really exaggerated vocal position, I'd like for you to go through these vowel sounds really carefully. I use H on the beginning because the H forces you to relax the tip of the tongue as the tongue changes its vowel position. So I'm going to say these. You can say these along with me. Ha, ha, he, ha, he, he. You can say that as many times as you'd like. I do know how strange that is. I know that this is uncomfortable. Just be glad your microphone is on. I had to do that with all of you guys listening. So I just want to show you, for example, what happens to the clarinet tone between the lowest tongue position of huh and he, which is what we like for clarinet playing. So if I play just a regular register slur from left hand C, in the huh position, it sounds like this. And the he position sounds like this. So I know that you can hear a big difference between those two things. I don't care if it's Zoom, and I don't care if it's a terrible microphone. I have a little Shure 5 microphone. It's very cute. It doesn't even matter. It doesn't take a genius or a good Zoom connection to hear the differences between those two tongue positions. So the higher the tongue goes into the mouth, the more condensed that airstream is into a tight column. So it's basically you're closing up that size of the tube from the throat towards the reed to speed up the air. I like to call it spinning the air at the reed. So you're going to try those vowels again and get your clarinets ready. We're going to go through this together and just see how you guys do. So here we go. Everybody say, huh. Exaggerate your vowel, and then play your register slur. Ha. He. He. Sounds really tight on that one, doesn't it? All right, and here's he. Your E vowel sound is really good for clarinet. Ready? He. All right, great. I see some questions in there. The name of that scale book is 24 Practical Studies of the Scales, and that's by Stevenard, and it's listed in the resources. I shared the resource at the very beginning of the chat. So if you scroll all the way to the top, you can find a link to a Google Drive file, and it has all of the references that I used today so that you can find those. Thank you for the question. All right, so that is some tongue height nightmare, right? So a lot of times you'll hear students and they'll just be kind of blaring like a foghorn, and it has to do with the shape of the inside of the mouth and what that tongue is doing. But basically, when your tongue is in E position, E, that means that the sides, I call them the wings of the tongue, are nice and high and they spread out and they actually touch the inside of your top molars. And that actually creates a smaller column without your air. Sorry, I'm trying to get that in there. I'm trying to get that file shared for you. Let's see. It says that it's not sharing. I don't know what it's doing. I'll try to get that in there again in just a minute. So yeah, the tongue goes And the wings of the tongue spread into the sides of the inside of your molars, and they close up your air chamber and make that air travel higher in the mouth. So that's a really great skill for us to have in our playing. I'm not sure why my chat is not sharing this file at the moment. So let me try to get back in there. It says that it wants to share it with Sarah. Let me get back to all panelists here. Okay, that should work. Now, the next thing is when we play with that E vowel sound, it helps to raise the tongue and get that air nice and fast. But the next step of that is making sure that your tongue doesn't pull too far away from your teeth. Because if the tip of your tongue pulls away too far, it opens up a channel for your air to go under your tongue, into the bottom of your mouth, and slow it down. And we are just aiming for fast air like crazy. So tongue proximity to the reed is the next thing that I want to talk to you guys about. So we're going to do this exercise real quick. And again, you're going to do this with a really exaggerated vocal sounds here. So you can go ahead and do that. And then into your E vowel from that SH. If you do this too many times, you may get dizzy. So don't do it too many times. Keep your feet flat on the floor. Also, TS. And then TSE, so you fall into your vowel. And I'm spitting all over myself. Isn't that charming? So this is teaching you to have that E vowel position, but it pulls the tip of the tongue towards your top teeth and leaves a really small space there. And that space is big enough to put your clarinet mouthpiece in there and your reed right behind it. For some students, the SH works better, and for some, the TS works better. Also for students who have braces, and especially if they have any bridge work behind their top teeth, they need to be able to pull into a full she there to make sure that they've got enough space. So it's a little more complicated when kids are dealing with orthodontics. So now we're going to see the results of the TSH, E, and the TSE vowel sounds here in your register slur from low A. So we put a T on the front just because when you start sound on the clarinet, you should always initiate sound with your tongue on the reed. There are exceptions, but this is the general rule. So when we play this, I want you to first say TSH and then fall into your vowel. And now play your register slur with me. And now TS. I'm spitting again. And TSE. And register slur. So one thing that I hope you noticed is when I play with the TSEE, I have a little bit thinner, brighter sound. It's definitely restricting the way the reed vibrates a little bit, but I can change my tone color by changing exactly where my proximity is for the tip of my tongue towards the reed, and this is a really great trick. So what I'm teaching you are generalizations, and then of course clarinetists do all kinds of refined skills to make things their own. But this is a really great way for you to practice, not just your vowel sound, but also tongue proximity. So the tongue height and the tongue tip proximity being as important as they are, I think it's one of the most important things about clarinet playing, because it's what gets your reed vibrating well, which is what produces your sound and makes the clarinet easy to play. The next thing I want to talk about for your simple steps is your air direction, because this can really mess things up or it can make things great. So let's talk about the direction of your air after. Oh, I forgot to mention, you should practice your harmonics. This is great for voicing in tongue position. It's outlined really well with great instructions for you in Kelly Burke's book. She has 3 harmonics exercises in that book that are fabulous. I use those with my students a lot. So direction of air. I remember Diana Haskell telling me in my very early lessons that I needed to fit my airstream into the eye of a needle. And this is a really great instruction for clarinet players because you're thinking about condensing the airstream in the mouth anyway. And you can further that process by thinking of the shape of your embouchure and the aperture, the strength in those muscles and the size of the opening to refine that airstream even more. So she would hold her fingertips right in front of her mouth like this. And she would say, I want you to try to get in your E position. I want you to try to get your airstream into the eye of a needle. Pretend your needle's here. And we would practice this, right? And I remember having a really wide airstream at first. I really was not sure about how to use the muscles of the mouth and the tongue inside the mouth, and I was a beginner. So that was true, honest, not understanding. But this exercise really helped me. This is one of the topics that I discuss in my book, the Tone and Air book, that was on your screen just now. So I have a set of books on my website. There are 3 of them that deal with tone and how to refine your tone based on different topics. So one of the things that I think we should do today is just try that. It's actually a lot harder than it sounds, but form your clarinet embouchure. And then I want you to think about your best breathing and breath support and try and keep your tongue in E position and try to aim your air into a small space about here. You see, it's pretty difficult. I'm feeling air all around my hand and all around the shape of that needle that I'm creating, and it's not perfect, but it is forcing me to make some changes in the mouth and in the shape of the embouchure itself to try to refine that even more. This is a really great skill for you to try and for students to try to continue to refine your airstream as it's coming to the reed to vibrate the reed more effectively. Unfortunately, in our teaching and in our classrooms, a lot of times this topic is misunderstood, and instead band directors or teachers will sometimes instruct students to blow down the tube, or they'll say through the clarinet. And through the clarinet is, it's great to think of filling up the instrument with sound, but your sound is not going to go through the clarinet because your airstream is in it. Your sound is going to go through the clarinet because the reed vibrates well. And so this does nothing to help refine the shape of your airstream coming towards the reed. It doesn't allow for that reed to vibrate really well or for the mouthpiece to function the way it was designed. And the results can be pretty damaging. I'm sure you remember this from beginning band. I know I do. But when you blow straight down the tube, your sound can get really spread. It would be really unfocused. If you slow down your airstream, let's say you're going to try to play soft with your air in that direction, it's going to sound hollow or dull in tone. The pitch is usually flat, especially when you play loud. And it kind of limits how well you can play softly. So we also have this whole concept from teachers who realize blowing down the tube doesn't work for clarinet, and instead they teach blow straight across, which is better. It does actually improve some things, but blowing straight across creates its own problems, and not with any surprise at all. It's the opposite side of what blowing down the tube does. So aiming directly across the mouthpiece will cause your air to ricochet off of the other side of the mouthpiece. If I blow in this direction, my reed will hit the wall and bounce back and forth from the beak to the reed over and over. So the sound is generally very raspy and noisy. It can have a lot of grit. The tone can be pinched and thin. The loud range is severely restricted because it wants to pinch the reed closed. The pitch can go wildly sharp, especially when you're playing quietly. Students can have a hard time using good air support in that direction because it blows the reed closed. It actually pinches the tip of the reed into the mouthpiece too much. And especially if the reed is really soft or waterlogged, that's an additional problem. So in order for that reed to vibrate correctly and for your mouthpiece to perform its duty the way that it was designed to do, students should blow across the mouthpiece, aiming at the end of the beak. And I'll show this to you in just a second. But this is where your mouthpiece shifts from its chamber shape into the bore shape on the inside of the instrument, or the round shape of your tube. So the mouthpiece is designed to further the work of focusing your tone and your sound and refining everything for you if you blow into that direction. And I remember my wonderful teacher, who's gone now, Ron DeCant at the Cincinnati Conservatory. In my first lessons with him, he used to remind me, I want you to aim for the top screw. And I had an old faithful Bonad inverted ligature. Now I have this great Silverstein ligature, but he would put his finger right on my top screw and he would say, aim your air at the top screw. And he didn't explain to me why. At the time, I was pretty ignorant, and it took me a while to find the right resources to read how that mouthpiece was designed and understand the acoustics there. But his methodology was perfect, and every time I would remember to do that, I would like my tone a lot more. I would feel like my sound was more refined and centered, and my pitch was more true, and my clarinet was easier to play. That's like a bonus. So yeah, that's a really great thing if you want to try that in your own teaching. Just reach around for your students, grab onto their barrel, remind them to lift the clarinet upward into their top teeth, right? So we're not pinching too much. But you can put your fingertip on the top of the ligature, that top screw if they have two screws, and remind them to aim their airstream in that direction. And it really should help to refine things a lot. So we're going to experiment with this. Get your clarinets out and ready again. All my students love this exercise. This is when it's a good time for you to practice wrong to learn to be right. So we're going to do all three here. I don't care which note you try. So it can be any note on your instrument, but I want you to try this with all three air directions. I want you to play where you're blowing down the tube. So I like to hold my hand here with my students. I'm not sure if you can see that while I'm sharing screen. Hold on one second. Okay, so I like to hold my hand here and have them aim at my fingers. And then for straight ahead, I do this in front of their face. And then at the end of the beak, I'll put my finger at the end of the beak of the mouthpiece. So that's how we'll try that today. So here we go. Pick a note, any note you love, and let's blow straight down the tube and see what kind of tone we have. Well, for me, this is what I call the blaring foghorn. The down the tube approach does not center and focus the tone. You're more likely to be loud all the time, and you're more likely to be flat. So now let's try straight ahead. Same note, blow straight ahead. Good, I can't hear you. I'm hoping you guys are done playing that note. You don't want to play it for very long anyway, because it usually doesn't sound so great. But I'm finding my note is super pinched, very thin. I can't get a good dynamic on it. I'm not getting good response from the reed. It feels really stubborn to play. All right, now let's try blowing for the end of the beak of the mouthpiece. So your top screw on your ligature, if you've got screws over there. So that particular direction in your airstream should allow for a more centered tone, a full tone, but not spread. It should allow you to control your dynamics. So I start a little loud and I try to taper off with embouchure strength, just see if I can control the decrescendo on there. That's a really, really great skill to practice with your students, because students often want to blow down the tube, even if they're not told to do that. And it's very difficult to play with control in the tone if the air gets too straight down the tube like that. So anybody noticing some some big changes with that? Hopefully. I can't see you guys. It's very weird. So yeah, in my own teaching, in that process, I do like to lift the barrel and remind them that they should be using upward pressure towards the top teeth. The thumbs have to be active, pushing upward and outward. And also, I like to make sure that their head isn't tilted down and that their head isn't tilted up. Sometimes people play with a bit of a high chin, and that can cause some problems as well. So just want to make sure that their head is in a pretty natural position. So those are the big things I wanted to talk to you today in concern of air. And now I want to talk about one of the things that messes that up, and that is articulation. So our fourth simple step today is creating a light tip bounce. So you feel like the first thing that you should teach with articulation, and the first thing that I like to practice in the day in my articulation, is long tones that migrate into a light tip bounce. So I'm going from something that's good air support, embouchure, all of those great voicing issues, tongue proximity, and then learning to tap the tongue really, really lightly and gradually getting to something that's a little bit more dramatic. But I feel that it's going to be really difficult to discuss this topic of stronger clarinet playing without addressing articulation. And this topic scares me because obviously you can't stick the entire universe into a tin can. And this is a very loaded topic. So instead of trying to do everything, I wanted to just talk about this light articulation, because I feel like if everybody could lightly tongue on the clarinet better, then we'd all be better clarinet players. That's just a crazy opinion. But so I'm going to share with you a couple of articulation teaching tools that have been really successful for me and my students. The first one is identifying how the tongue touches the reed, and the second one helps to train that tongue to be even lighter. So in my opinion, one of the difficulties in teaching articulation, especially to younger students or students who have bad habits with tonguing, is that they generally have very little understanding of what the tongue is doing. It's just not a muscle they're familiar enough with since they can't see it. And they know to talk and they know to chew, but other than that, they just don't know what's happening. So the little exercises that I've given you about condensing the airstream and tongue proximity to the reed, they're both really, really good tools that we need to have, and that helps them to identify with different portions of the tongue. And these exercises will continue to do that with the shape of the front of the tongue and how firm the muscle is in the front of the tongue. So the student is going to need a clear understanding of that area, the tip of the tongue, and what it's doing and what it's touching in terms of what part of the reed, and then how tight or relaxed the tip of the tongue is when it's touching. So here's an identification exercise for you. This is an exaggerated vocal technique as well. I'm just going to share this with you. And we're going to be super exaggerated in our enunciation here. I want you to say D, really hard D, so that you can feel how much of the tongue touches in what areas. Say that a few times and then we're going to talk about it. D, D, D. All right, and now we're going to move on and say T. Say it exaggeratedly, but it should definitely feel and sound different than D did. T, T, T. And now go back between the two to see if you can identify how the muscle of the tongue is different with the two sounds. How much tongue touches? Where does it touch? And what does the muscle feel like when it's touching? D, T, D, T. So most of the time when I do this with students for the first time, they really can't verbalize what it is that they're feeling. But once I verbalize with them, they're like, oh yeah, that's what it feels like. So that's what we'll do here today. When you repeatedly and exaggeratingly do the D sound, can you feel that the top of your tongue, just behind the tip, hugs up against the soft palate, the lower palate, or the gums behind your top teeth? And that area is firm when it touches and it pushes into the soft tissue before it pulls away. D, D. And again, if students have orthodontics, this might be a little bit different. Can you also feel when you do that, that the tip of your tongue is also barely touching the back of your top teeth? So a lot of people miss that because the tip of the tongue, when it does that, is not a firm part of the muscle. It's a little less formed and it doesn't push as much. D. It just basically taps behind those top teeth. So the difference with the T is that you have less surface area in the same part of the tongue, just behind the tip on the top, touches near the same area, usually a little further forward, T, and closer to the line of your top teeth and gums, but the tip of the tongue still touches, barely, T, your T, the back of your top teeth. So I want you to kind of experiment with that until you get more familiar with it. Some students feel things just a little bit differently. I'm sure that we all enunciate a little bit differently, and also depending on the shape of your teeth, it might be a slightly different contact. But knowing where and how your tongue touches is super important. On the clarinet, we almost never want to use Ds. D is too harsh of a syllable for our reed to really respond to. It stuns things and makes it sound pretty explosive. I won't say that I don't use a D ever. In fact, there is an example that I put in your shared screen here of a piece that this is about as D-ish as I will get, if that's a word, D-ish. I'm on the wrong clarinet, sorry about this. This is Shostakovich. I'm sure some of you know that. It's a fantastic excerpt for the clarinet. And it's really heavy tonguing on those quarter note accents. I still don't think I'm quite to the D, but I'm definitely getting closer in that direction. So most of us will instead need to practice and perfect this T skill, the light articulation of the T skill. There are more instances, obviously, in music where the T is appropriate, and we'll talk in a minute about how to get the tongue even lighter than this T articulation. But here's some great resources for you if you're looking for more information on teaching articulation or even just some more practice techniques. These are great educational resources that I've used over the years. And again, those are in that Google file that I shared with you in the chat. The first is by Larry Guy, who I believe is one of the greatest pedagogues of our time. He has several resources out for a clarinet that are very, very good. And then articulation training is one of my favorites. My students love this book. And then the other two, Howard Klug's, the clarinet doctor. I think I put the wrong title in your document. I put The Doctor Is In, which is his old title for that book. And then Tom Rittenauer's The Educator's Guide, which has some really great information in chapter 5 about articulation. So now that we know where the tongue is and what it's doing between the D's and the T's, let's talk about how to get the tongue even lighter, because honestly, sometimes a T is a little abrasive on the clarinet. And a lot of times we need a lighter tongue. For example, when we do downward leaps and we need to slow the reed down. So if you're slurring from high C to open G, you're probably not slurring. Because if you try to slur, you're probably going to squeak, right? So we use what I call the butterfly graze. It's like a really light tongue tap on the very edge of the reed to try to slow the reed down in that motion. But that isn't audible from a distance, hopefully. That's the plan. That's the goal. So we're going to change this now. I want to go from your T articulation that you were doing just a minute ago and jump into what I call the exaggerated TH. So T, T, T. You should still feel 2 points of contact, a small patch just behind the tip on the top of your tongue, puddles up against your soft, like gums right behind your top teeth, T. And then a little part of the tip of your tongue bounces off the back of your top teeth. T, T. And we're going to switch that so that there's no patch of tongue on the top of your reed touching. But we're just going to graze the front of the reed on the bottom teeth with a TH. Thee, thee, thee. And what this does is it helps you to identify with a really small line. I remember one of my teachers used to say, use one taste bud to tongue. And I was like, dude, I can't do that. And it was a great lesson. I wish I could tongue with one taste bud, but I just had no idea how to envision that. This helps me a lot. TH allows me to feel a very small space of the tongue that is allowed to touch the teeth. But when it touches, it's super light. The tip of the tongue is not a formed, firm muscle. It's in a relaxed position. And the part that touches the teeth is just a very thin line. So if you can exaggerate that TH and say the, the. What you'll notice is that the tongue never gets firm in the front. It stays a relaxed muscle, which allows it to move quickly. It does not stun the reed, create a crevice in the reed, which would be awful. But it just allows us to have a real light approach. So now let's go back between the T and the TH. T, the, T, the, T, the. And you'll notice when you say TH that tongue bounces away from the teeth. It's almost like a pull away, which is great. I tell my students it should be like hot potato. You don't want to leave the tongue around on the reed if you don't have to, because the reed needs to vibrate. So one of the places for the TH tonguing, I would say, is in the classical and early romantic portato legato, which is just it's the dots under the slur that you see in your Rose book. This articulation is misunderstood. It's not well defined except in this particular time period, and the marking is kind of confusing, but the slur on this marking means that all the notes should be connected. And the dot under the slur defines how the tongue should touch the reed, and dots mean it should be very light tonguing. So we call this the portato or potato legato articulation. You can change the front of that by not having any mark would be slurred if it's just under a slur. Or if you want something that's heavier, you can have marcato accents under a slur, and that would mean a firm tongue with connected notes. Or a tenuto line, which would mean it's probably got a little bit of air emphasis with the tongue on those. So there's a lot of variety in the way these things are marked. But that TH tonguing, it should be, I'm sorry, my reed got all funky. It should be nice and light and still allow those notes to be connected. So this is from Larry Guy's newer edition of the 32 Etudes by Rose. It's a really great book with a commentary. So you have one page of commentary and suggestions, and then it has the etude on the second page each time, all the way through those 32. It's really, really well done. So I encourage you to look at that resource as well. So applying both of these styles of articulations, the D's and the TH's, will take some time for sure. And they're not the only two we use. Obviously, I did use some D's in that Shostakovich a little while ago. And the T's can change shape a lot, just like the TH's can change shape a lot. And we also can couple that with air emphasis. So there's a lot of ways to vary the type of articulation. But I feel like if you can't get a light enough tongue, it's difficult to tongue quickly and to get coordination with the fingers. So it's super, super important, which is why I decided to include that today. Students should start coordinating the tongue to finger motion first with repeated notes on each before they learn to do long lines of single notes with the tongue. So if you're having trouble getting da 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 da, then just doing da 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 da, and then 3 of each, and then 2 of each, and then 1 of each will really help. But you need to know what the tongue feels like when it's in its bounce. Without the fingers moving, because otherwise it's going to create some issues there. So I know that's a lot. I'm just going to rattle on. We're almost done. We just got to number 5, and this is the last clarinet topic that I chose to speak about today. There's a lot of things that I could have talked about, but I really wanted to deal with some clarinet specific issues. Hopefully they're the right issues and they're helping you, but this is a big one. Understanding throat tones. So I just made a new book about this, actually. It's a really, really short ebook. But a clarinetist needs a very, very clear understanding of rules for hand position, as well as for fingerings and alternate fingerings. And there are rules on clarinet, and then there are reasons to break rules, and then there are also alternates all over the place. So it's definitely a challenge for clarinetists. Resources on this topic can be difficult to find, and they don't always come with the rule language. They have the exercises and not actually say the rule. But one resource that I really love that's listed in your resources is this one. It's by Nilo Hovey. I think it's Nilo, maybe it's Nilo. I don't know for sure. But I love this book. I came across it by accident, and it's one of my favorite resources. So you look over here on the right at number 1. It's really, really small, but I think you can get the gist. Number 1 is teaching you why you need a chromatic F sharp. It states in the middle in this short paragraph the rule. It gives you an example of needing that rule in a short snip of music. And it does that 10 different rules, and then it gives you etudes and exercises and also little clarinet choir pieces to reinforce those 10 rules. It's fantastic. I don't know why this book is not used more in young clarinet choirs. But if you can get hold of that, I promise you will like this book. It's super well done. I have also created my own set of books on these topics: hand position and also hand motion, that clearly defines the position and motion for every finger on every key, and where there are rules and where we need to break those rules. This is something that I find myself teaching in lessons a lot. And I'll say something to a student like, you can't slide from a sliver to a tone hole. And I say, where is that written down, right? And so I finally got tired of them asking that question, and I wrote it down. So now I have some resources with pictures and with little examples of music, and it defines, there are 4 uses of the first finger, or there are 2 motions involved in this finger, like your third finger, tone hole and hover, and also sliver key. So it's just a good resource for defining clearly what it is that each finger will need to do, and what it should look like in that process. Plenty of pictures. Yeah, let me copy that again. I've put it in there a few times, and it says it's going to, it says all panelists. I'm just a dummy. And attendees. Okay, now we got it. I hope you guys can see that. Let me know if that's in there now. So in addition to these basic fingering competencies that we're talking about, the throat tones are a unique area. They're really misunderstood a lot, and sometimes they are considered really complex, and so people just kind of give up teaching it. But the good news is that throat tones are really not as complex as people like to make them appear. So I put together a free resource. You can find it in that thing that finally got shared the right way. Sorry about that. It's called Throat Tones. Super creative title. But it's a free resource that I've created through Mad Clarinet. It is a 6-page ebook. That's including the title page. So it's super short. What is a throat tone? Why is it a problem? What do I do to fix it? What will happen when I fix it? And also, here are some sample fingerings to try. So I hope that that's useful to you. You can share that. It's a free resource. It's an easy PDF. You can display that through Zoom or on an overhead because it's just a regular PDF slide. And then also in your resources that I shared, there's an upgrade to that by my sponsor, Bacune Musical Services. Has also a throat tone fingering packet that's free. It's a free resource on their website, and I call that the level up to mine. Mine is really super simple. So like I'll share that with a band director who's a trombonist by training, and has been a little bit perplexed and confused by throat tones their whole career, and their life has changed. It's like, okay, now I get it, and I can do this. I can work with this throat tone topic with my students now. So I hope that that's valuable to you or to your students, and feel free to share it. So in my own teaching, I have some names for throat tone fingerings. It's kind of snotty. I am a clarinetist after all. Throat tone fingerings, when you have no fingers down, is called wrong. My students hate this rule, but the clarinets don't have good tone or resonance in throat tones when they're open fingerings, which is why they're built sharp, because the manufacturers know that you're supposed to correct them and make them sound good. And if you do that and the instrument used to be in tune, you're now going to be flat. So it's your job to correct those things, and that should put you in tune. So the right hand down technique is a version of correcting throat tones. I call it your basic 1.0 version. This is the easiest way to teach that concept and make some improvements. It maybe is not the best option, but it works. And then I call it anchoring across the break, which means that your fingers in each hand start to go down in your throat tones, in your break crossing technique. So that's your upgrade. And then when you're using true resonance fingerings, I call that your version 3.0. So you now have a couple of skills there that you can use to refine your playing. And when you interchangeably can move between all of those skills and use anchor fingering super quickly in your chromatic scale, but use a more perfect resonance fingering in your Mozart concerto, then you are at version 3.5 and you're a rock star. So it does take some time, and you have to be patient with yourself. You know, it's not rocket science, but it does take some coordination, and you need to do some experimentation. And I would say every clarinet has a slightly different set of perfect resonance fingerings. So you may need to do a little bit of what I call finger Sudoku with those fingering charts and see if you can get some great options there. So we're going to do a little exercise now. We're going to start without your clarinet. If you could find a pen or a pencil, or I have straws on my desk all the time for working with embouchure, but I'm just going to go through an exercise that can help you with your throat tone skill by building it in small steps, and hopefully you guys will be able to use this with students as well. So the first thing we're going to do is super easy. You just hold your pen or your pencil with all 10 of your digits, thumbs and fingers, and everything should be lightly squeezing down. You don't have to use any sort of crazy strength. We just want to make sure that everything is secure. And then you're going to lift 3 of your digits, your left thumb, your first finger, and your other first finger. I'll repeat that. Squeeze 10, left thumb, first finger, first finger. Good. Now do them together. So 10, 7, 10, 7, 10, 7, 10. And now we want to learn to do that without lifting so far. So I start with a really exaggerated motion just so students can see and feel, Now we're just going to go from squeezing 10 to not squeezing 3. Squeezing 10, not squeezing 3. Squeezing 10, not squeezing 3. And so if I go back to my shared screen here with you guys, I have some pictures of my non-clarinetist daughter doing this. So there's some squeeze and some lift of 3. So start with that super exaggerated motion and get your students coordinated. Sometimes they need to see it. So that's why I don't use a clarinet at first. It's way easier to see your 10 fingers. But next step is with your 10 fingers. So here we go. I'll get my little clarinet up where you can see. We're going to go from 10 fingers, and then we're going to lift 3. And you can start with exaggerated motion here. 10, 7, 10, 7, 10, 7, 10, 7. And you'll notice that I'm all the way down on my B fingering when I've got my 10 down. So everything is squeezed, and I've got a long B ready to go. And I go from 10 to 7, okay? And then we need to practice not lifting them, but just relaxing them. So there's no squeeze. 10, relax. 10, relax. 10, relax. Now that gets you into your open G position with too many fingers down. Like I wouldn't play open G with that many fingers down. It would be terrible. But it's just a training technique. The next thing is to train your thumb and your first finger to rock and roll into your B flat fingering. So if you don't know a lot about rock and roll, it's just a teaching pedagogy technique that Diana Haskell used with me. I still use it in my own teaching, where the thumb rocks onto your register key instead of lifting and placing. And your first finger rolls into your A key rather than lifting and placing. Okay, and that's explained in my hand motion book. So if you want more details or pictures about that, you can find those things there. But it's a pretty simple concept to avoid having too much motion in your thumb and first finger going to B flat. So now we're going to go from 10 and rock and roll to B flat. And you'll notice my 1 in my right hand still comes up. So 10, B flat, 10, B flat, 10, B flat, 10, B flat, okay? So now I'm going to test your skills here a little bit. Lucky for you, it's a silent test, so you all get A's. But here's the exercise. And the trick is, don't move more than you have to. Try that a few times on your own. And just see if you can get that nice and smooth with your rock and roll motion into B flat. And with only moving those 3 fingers. So you're not allowing your pinkies to let go. You're not allowing your whole left hand to fly up. But you're really anchoring both hands into their position to make going back across the break nice and smooth. So here's a really good challenge for you guys. I wish I could see you. I love being able to see my audience when I'm working with people so that we can get more direct interaction. But can you do that same exercise in a C fingering instead of a B fingering? And go from C to B flat with only moving 3 fingers. And of course, your left pinky that was on B can just be hovering. So try that, C to B flat. And back, C to B flat and back. You can do the same thing from any of those notes across the break to any of your throat tones, G sharp, A, or B flat. The G natural, for most clarinets, if you leave more than your 3rd finger down or your 1st finger down on some instruments, if you're lucky, the G just gets spread in tone and starts to get too low in pitch. So for buffet clarinets, I generally would always use open G fingering, totally open, unless I was playing quietly, and then I would use my 3rd finger being closed so I could anchor with my 3rd finger. I play Bakun instruments now, and on my Bakun clarinets, they're built so beautifully in the throat tones, but I've had to retrain myself because their open G is sharp and not as refined in tone, but when you add 2 fingers of the right hand, it's truly beautiful. It is a gorgeous note. I really, really love it. But it did take me a little bit of time to retrain my resonance fingerings to get used to that particular skill. All right, so in the resources that I shared in your chat, there's a link to my little short, tiny throat tone fingering chart that's for free. And I also provided the link for the website for Bakun's free fingering chart on throat tones as well, which is like a step up. It just gives more options and more explanation. And I feel like you should start maybe with the easier one and work your way up. All right, and even with these great resources, your clarinetists are going to need a methodology. So trying to make them understand these throat tones and get them into practice is super, super important. I would start with close A mechanism studies. You know you love them. It is called the Clarinet Bible for a reason. And those particular exercises, the exercises of mechanism that are in there teach you how to move properly on every tone hole of the instrument. And it does include your throat tone keys in the tone holes so that you have plenty of exercises to work on your resonance fingerings and your crossing of the break by leaving fingers down. And they're all super short, and you do them in tons of repetition at a moderate tempo. In fact, Diana used to make me do them at quarter note equals 60, and I had to do 10 repetitions. And I think that that's the way the Bible should be done. So I'm a stickler for lots of great clarinet pedagogy. If it worked 200 years ago, it's probably going to work. And then for you advanced players out there that really want to challenge, I included this one. This is Eric Mandat's book called Finger Food, and it has some fantastic challenges in it for training the fingers, especially the throat tone ones in there are really fantastic just for keeping your skills developing. So I hope that I chose the right 5 topics for you guys today. It was super hard. I kept changing my mind and throwing things out, but I wanted to make sure that we talked about clarinet specific issues and I could give both performers and teachers hopefully a little bit of information to kind of improve in both areas. And I'm happy to speak with you guys on other topics. So if you would like to talk with me about engaging a different lecture at a different time, you can reach me through my website, which is druhanclarinet.com. Or you can look at Mad Clarinet, which is my business for educational resources. Or you can just search my last name, Druhan, D-R-U-H-A-N, and clarinet on Google, and I think I'm the only Druhan clarinetist on earth. But I'm happy to speak with you guys more on additional topics. I just wanted to make sure today we could fit it into an hour to an hour and a half. And again, I want to take a minute and thank Sarah. I think she's still around. She's been an enormous help getting me set up to teach for today. And I want to thank BK. He's been amazing, both with the Silverstein Company, but also in helping with this concept for WoodwindFest and getting us onto an online platform for some teaching and some playing and just basically sharing information. And I'm just really, really grateful for that. Do you have any questions? I see that somebody was asking about my mouthpiece. My mouthpiece is super strange. I love it. But it is a Pomerico. I say Pomerico. Some people say Pomerico. It's an Italian maker. This is called the Wizard. It is a really wide-faced mouthpiece. And I had to, it took me a long time to figure out what was going to work with that equipment. I use a Leger European cut for that particular mouthpiece. But I had a really severe injury years ago that forced me to need to play with less tension in my playing, and that included throat tension and neck tension, and I was playing with too much resistance, so I needed something that was going to work with less resistance in order to save my career. And that mouthpiece has really allowed me to do that, but it is quite different from what I was trained on for sure. Any other questions or concerns? Oh, I see BK. It's nice to see you, BK. All right, any other questions? Okay, well, I wish I could see you. I hope that you got some good information. I'm going to stay on for the next few minutes, so if you want to stick around and ask me a question a little more in private after some people log off, you are welcome to do that. And then I hope you get to go to the recital that starts in just a little bit. I'm super excited. I am currently playing on the Leger European cut, which is designed to work with this mouthpiece. So they work really well together, but I'll say it's a process. I had to really work hard to pair up my materials to make sure I had something that I liked. When I played in the Army Band in Washington, D.C., I used to use Leger reeds a lot when it was wintertime and I had to play outside because they, unlike cane, they don't break outside. But I'm working to find I'm working to find new solutions. I feel like every time I get comfortable with something, then I start looking for something different. But I've been super happy with this. It's helped me save my career, and that's really been a blessing for sure. Blown away with fast compressed air. Thank you very much. All right, I'm looking just to see if there's any additional questions. You guys are great. Thank you for putting comments in there. Yeah, thanks for coming. I really appreciate you being here on a Friday, especially in COVID when we're all a little bit tired and stressed out. Yes, I have tried the Ambipoly reeds, and actually on this mouthpiece, I think they maybe were just a little too narrow, so I was having trouble with resistance right away when I was starting to just initiating sound. They sounded really beautiful, but it was the initiation, so I definitely need to work more with that. I'm gonna have to see if I can get a better combination for the Wizard, but yeah, I would really be interested in that. Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, I need to check into that Ambipoly again. The first time I tried it, yeah, they were really narrow. They did work better on. I had a hard rubber mouthpiece. I think it was one of the Bakun mouthpieces. I forget which one, and I was using that for a little while. All right, guys, you have been great. I'm going to go ahead and log off. And again, if you need to reach me, you can find me on my website or you can find me on social media. And of course, my university keeps me publicly accessible at all times. All right, thanks so much. Bye, everyone.